The year 1898, and people in the frontier town of Denver, Colorado had reason to parade. Their once dusty outpost for gold diggers and traders was beginning to turn into an emerging western city. All within the previous 20 years, the railroad had arrived, the city population more than tripled to over 100,000, statehood had been granted, and a new miraculous energy source had made its debut: electricity. Denver, like everywhere else, had relied on steam engines and gas manufacturing for power, but change was coming. So mysterious was the concept of this new white magic that industrialists in Denver decided to stage exhibitions demonstrating electricity could be used safely. In July of 1880, the Denver Times reported what the amazed onlookers had seen the night before. The electric light at the circus was the subject of much comment last evening, it being the first exhibition of this invention ever given in Denver. The brightness of the light was made more vivid by contrast with the yellow light of oil. The visitors seemed to be divided in opinion as to the merits of the new light. Some declared it hurt their eyes, as doubtless it did when they gazed at it steadily, but others noted an absence of the usual painful sensation of burning eyeballs caused by the smoke and dimness of the kerosene lights. Small generating plants like this one began to emerge as electrical power gradually crept from novelty towards practical everyday use. As the demand for electricity rose in Denver, so did the need for qualified men to channel its awesome power. And on March 24, 1898, 7 men signed the charter of the newest body of the National Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 68. The names of Redding, Flieger, Clark, Ham, Hummel, Vion, and Warner, and 9 other original members made a pledge to stand together for their own good and welfare in this dangerous, demanding trade. Local 68 in Denver was born. The effects were immediate. Average wages of $2 for a 10-hour day climbed to around $3 for an 8-hour day. Although still confined to mostly business and industrial use, Denver quickly became one of the most electrified cities in the world. The Colorado capital, in fact, was the second city in the nation to have electrically powered streetcars jostling through its downtown area, thanks to the efforts of the Denver Tramway Company. Our original streetcars were not without their problems. Designed by Professor Short from the University of Denver, the cars were powered by a ground cable in the slot beneath the tracks. But because persons and animals, especially in the wet weather, often receive such a startling shock, the public raised Cain with old Professor Short and his cars and demanded removal of the danger. That's why our cars are today powered by overhead electric cables. By now, the demand for electricity was spreading across not only the U.S., but Canada as well. And a new charter, that of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, was granted to Denver. At the turn of the century, competition was fierce in the electrical industry. It wasn't unusual for companies to seek gains at the workers' expense. And in 1902, the inside wiremen of Local 68, now about 90 strong, went on strike when owners balked at a raise from $3.25 a day to $4 per day.
The Building Trades Council endorsed the wiremen. Non-union workmen were employed by the bosses, but it was found impossible to work for them, for whenever they appeared, union carpenters, painters, plumbers, and others refused to work on the same building with them. This brought work to a standstill. After 3 weeks, the 11 firms whose wiremen were on strike agreed to a compromise of $3.60 for 8 hours labor, and the men went back to work.
By the 1903 convention in Salt Lake City, membership in the Brotherhood was surging, and Local 68 was enjoying the wave. 68 made the first of what was to become many high-profile marks on the town with the construction of this 1600 light bulb welcome arch in front of Union Station. Dedicated on the 4th of July in 1906, Mayor Spears said the arch would stand for ages as an expression of love and good wishes. This expression proved to be fleeting, however. The arch was termed a traffic hazard and torn down in 1931. One thing on firm ground was the union movement in Denver, as solidarity became a way of life for an ever-growing number of workers. Not only did unions work together, they played together, and with bragging rights at stake on the job site, The Union League featured the hottest rivalries and most spirited games Denver had ever witnessed.
Attendance at the games is increasing, the large attendance of ladies being a feature. The management is doing all possible for their comfort and enjoyment. You can bring your best girl, the other fella's best girl, or their sisters or mothers, and the cost will only be 25 cents.
By 1910, the population of Denver had doubled since the turn of the century to well over 200,000 residents. Due west of the Trinity Methodist Church Tower, the Colorado Gas and Electric Company building was beginning to take shape, opening with a dazzling display of 10,000 light bulbs outlining the building. Local 68 electricians posed for the camera to celebrate the grand opening of another downtown landmark as the new Central Savings Bank on 15th and Arapahoe was completed in 1911. The following year, Denver's chief electrician and Local 68 member Joseph Reardon pushed through an ordinance which would forever change the way work was done. Reardon mandated that all classes of buildings must have wiring that is installed in armor conduits. Explaining the extra cost was well worth the decrease in fire danger. 1913 was a landmark year for the working man and woman. On his last day in office, President William Howard Taft's signature marked the beginning of a new department of the federal government. The new Department of Labor's mission was to foster, promote, and develop the welfare of wage earners. This official recognition was not universally popular, however, and sometimes touched off violent battles between labor and management in the struggle over workers' rights. Not long after the Labor Department's battles began in Washington, the biggest danger facing Local 68 electricians was the outbreak of World War I, a war that signaled a new call to arms in the American workforce. Battles are not only between armed men, but between the factories, workshops, and mines of the contending nations, said the Labor Secretary in 1917. While workers at home rolled up their sleeves in the war effort, 30 Local 68 electricians left behind their $6.60 a day wages and were sent off to battle. Remarkably, in what was the bloodiest war ever fought to date, all of them returned home safely. The victory was far-reaching for working Americans. Passed into law was the establishment of a minimum wage, an 8-hour workday, and the abolishment of the despicable practice of child labor. Workers' desire to organize was also acknowledged. A new industrial society was emerging. It was a time of undreamed-of prosperity. 40% of the entire world's wealth was attributed to the United States. The 20s were here, and things were roaring. Use of electricity was becoming more commonplace, but its installation still required a steady hand.
We had to be damn careful with that 220 and 440 or any of that. I never wore a ring or a watch or anything like that when I worked around any of it.
Denver and Local 68 shared in the good times. IBEW electricians were in the midst of building USA General Hospital 21, later named Fitzsimmons General Hospital. Local 68 played a major role in what was at the time one of the largest military medical institutions in the world. Denver was selected for the sprawling 48-structure complex because of the climate, and the dry, invigorating air was what recovering soldiers needed. But even in the good days, there were trouble spots. So-called open shops seek to gain back what some employers had considered losses to labor. Attempts at union busting continued to plague workers. Local 68 had just thrown its support behind employees of the Denver Tramway Company who were striking for higher wages. When the company brought in professional strikebreaker John Blackjack Jerome from San Francisco to restore services, riots ensued. 5 cars were overturned in front of the Immaculate Conception Cathedral on Colfax. Trouble broke out around the city until Mayor Bailey called in federal troops to restore order. Peace was restored, but bad feelings simmered for years. News of the uprising traveled around the country, prompting this letter to 68 President Pillars from a union rep in Los Angeles.
Dear Sir and Brother, the Denver Tramway case was another evidence of the open shop spirit there, and in fact all over the country. I want to congratulate you on the work done for 68, and I'm here to tell you, your membership, and the world at large, that one Charlie Pillars, alone and unaided, pulled that over and saved the wrecking of the local. Yours fraternally, F.J. Road.
Towards the end of the decade, the optimism of the times revealed a soft underbelly. The fever of unsound financial speculation pushed Wall Street to the boiling point. American wage earners were bringing home dollars worth less and less. In Denver, work was already slow when the market crashed. The Great Depression was at hand. Private construction in town came to a virtual standstill. Unemployment in Denver soared. Membership in '68 tumbled.
Well, I was working in mostly in residence work, and we had small developments going on here and there, and you'd wire a block of houses at a time, and a few school buildings were being built, and that was about all the activity there was.
At its lowest point, electricians that did get work were being paid 90 cents an hour, more than a 33% cut in wages. The calls that did come in were shared by the brothers. Some members were among those who resorted to panning for gold in the Platte River near downtown. C.B. Noxon resigned as business manager, but membership refused to accept his resignation. It was a time to ride out the storm. With the inauguration of FDR came hopes for a new deal for the American worker.
Our greatest primary task is to put people to work. This is no unsolvable problem if we face it wisely and courageously. It can be accomplished in part by direct recruiting by the government itself, treating the task as we would treat the emergency of a war.
Dozens of new programs and agencies signaled a reinvestment in America. The National Labor Relations Act officially guaranteed workers rights to organize and to bargain collectively free from restraint or coercion. The IBEW International Executive Council reported in 1936 that the West seemed to be making the best recovery, as evidenced by the construction of Lowry Air Force Base. This emerging technical school for aerial observation was the major employer of Local 68 electricians. 5/7s, 35-hour work weeks became more accessible. The country and the local was slowly digging out. By the end of the decade, all eyes were on the expanding war in Europe and in the Pacific. The IBEW was quick to throw its support behind the impending war effort. Large numbers of Local 68 electricians reported for work with the construction of the Denver Ordnance Plant, 8 miles west of town on U.S. Highway 6. Construction of the massive 200-building facility went on 24 hours a day.
Well, we made bullets, just the cartridge, and they made the brass shell from scratch and pressed it into a cartridge. Then they loaded it and loaded the bullet in it. Some of them were steel-cased bullets, and some of them were incandescent bullets.
With the attack on Pearl Harbor came the United States' full involvement in the war, and an unprecedented surge in factory manufacturing was underway. Advancements in technology placed more demands on electrical work than ever before. By the time plans for the D-Day invasion began to crystallize, Local 68 was already at work back home, playing an active role.
After we left the ordnance plant, why then we came down to the old CNS railroad shops where they were building landing craft, and we did the electrical work on those landing craft under the same 10-hour, 7 days on that.
When the war ended, Local 68 was on a roll. The economy was expanding. There was plenty of work in building and manufacturing. Housing boomed as Denver's suburbs expanded. New contractors were signing up with the local at a pace of more than one a month. Denver was changing, especially for the boys returning home from the war.
It felt like I was a stranger. especially to the traffic around town. I'd driven in Denver before I left, and then when I come back to Denver and started driving again, it had changed so much, lights and so forth and so on, and more traffic, and you'd come up to an intersection, oh, what am I going to do now? Before that, it was pretty much open roads and no one-way streets and all this other stuff.
Post-World War II was also a time that saw Local 68 celebrate a significant landmark, its 50th anniversary. In April of 1948, the local took to the streets in parade form and threw a bash at the Savoy Hotel downtown. The governor, the mayor, business manager Williams, and IBEW International President Tracy were among the celebrants.
Stronger than dirt. New Ajax laundry detergent. Mr. Clean gets rid of dirt and grime and grease in just a minute.
First, Araxo powdered hand soap in a new plastic decorator container. Looks like this.
The widespread use of television and a host of new or improved appliances ushered in a new electrical age. Our dependence on electricity spurred the public service company's call to Local 68 to build the giant powerhouses like the Arapahoe plant and the Cherokee plant. Local 68 was in the midst of an era when the state's manufacturing capacity was doubling. 68's ranks were pushing the 1,000 member mark, and the local moved into a new home on East 17th Street. By and large, Local 68 was busy.
Well, mainly industrial jobs and commercial jobs. Like the Masonic Temple was one of them, the theaters, drive-in theaters, and worked out at where the Federal Center is now. I worked out there three times, and I worked out at Lowry Field on telephone systems, and then worked on the missile sites. When they was putting all the missile sites in, I worked on them.
By now, the USSR was testing the A-bomb, and our once uneasy ally was now the newest threat to world peace.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. That's why these children are practicing to duck and cover just as you do in your school. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it.
The Soviet threat resulted in the installation of the first generation of the ICBM and Titan missile sites, many of which were scattered around Denver.
We were asked to do the normal electrical work, you know, running the pipe, pulling a wire for power, lights and heating and stuff. But then over a period of time, because of the newness of the programs and stuff, we got involved in terminating the cabinets for the controls and everything on these missiles, and it was an eye-opener.
This civil defense program was a major employer of wiremen for a good portion of the 60s, and it was easy to see why. Local 68 electricians installed more than 3 million feet of wire at each silo and supplied each site with enough power to house 150 people underground for 30 days.
At the time of the Cold War, the Berlin crisis, I was working out at the missile sites at that time. And I come home one day, I had served in the Navy, and my wife hands me this letter, and I opened it, and of course it was a pretty good shock to me because they wanted to know my status in the reserves, naval reserves. So it took me about 5 minutes to get that captain on the hook and say, hey, I didn't know I was a goddamn reserve. And the next call I got was disregard that last notice. So it apparently went a lot deeper than a lot of people thought.
When the Cold War thankfully began to thaw, the peaceful use of nuclear energy started to emerge. The Public Service Company sent Local 68 electricians to work at the Fort St. Vrain Nuclear Generating Station as the Atomic Energy Commission made nuclear power more broadly available. The 70s ushered in work at a steady clip throughout the region. Big jobs at Rocky Flats, Johns Manville, the Henderson Mill, and at Blue Cross Blue Shield kept the local hopping. It was also an era of urban renewal downtown, a time that would begin to change the face of the Denver skyline. By the middle of the decade, wages had doubled within only the past 10 years to well over $10 an hour. Denver was booming, and with membership now at about the 2,000 mark, Local 68 was by far the fastest growing local in the district. Travelers and white tickets populated Denver job sites. In fact, 68's failure to accept white ticket workers into the union would be a move the local would come to regret. Although national unemployment and inflation figures were the highest since the Depression, Denver was doing just fine. The boom cycle of the 70s spilled over into the early 80s, with the towering Civic Center and United Bank buildings the most visible signs of a still strong market. But while revenues and profits soared to the billion-dollar level, projections showed the end was near. And when it came, it hit hard. The combination of unemployment, a slow economy, and union concessions put a temporary end to the growth of Local 68. As a rule, what jobs there were going to the lowest bidder, and the white ticket workers the local didn't absorb into the union in the 70s became the competition in the 80s.
It was about 84. In the Denver market, the bottom completely fell out, and we took a major pay cut. There was no work in Denver. You were looking at 600 to 800 guys on the books, and there was no place to travel in the country. So you just had to hang in, work while you could, and just fight for our market share. And slowly but surely we got it back and worked ourselves out of it. That's where I really found out about brotherhood. And if you haven't been around it, coming from other industries and careers, it's a unique experience because guys would help you out financially. They'd keep the meals on the table. And guys' wives would pitch in, and you might have a brother living with you. And that's how you survived. You hung tight, and you might work for a couple months and then quit, and then so another brother could work for a few months.
68 managed to circle the wagons during the tough times, and with the building of a new convention center, a Budweiser brewery, and the Pawnee and the Rawhide power plants, it was clear that the light at the end of the tunnel wasn't a train after all. Under new leadership and direction, programs such as Comet became the new lifeblood of the IBEW. A renewed sense of determination and pride was standard issue in the tool belt of the mind. Fittingly, the largest public works project in the world came to Denver with the construction of Denver International Airport. The massive job was the catalyst in a confident, changing economy that again brought good times to Denver. Much like the arrival of the railroad 130 years ago, DIA established Denver as a port city for the 21st century and beyond. New business and investment continues to stream into Denver. New buildings are going up around us, and many more are moving beyond the drawing board stage. As membership in our local hits the 2,500 mark in this our 100th anniversary, we celebrate a proud past and look to an even brighter future with the same dream our union forefathers had more than a century ago. A dream to unite all workers, to make life better for ourselves and those around us. A dream that is our duty to pass on to those that follow in our footsteps 100 years from now.
I'm still proud of our local 68. There wasn't very many members then when I went in there.
I'm very, very proud that I've been an IBEW member for 55 years, 56 years it is now.
Growing up through the trade and being an apprentice and being a journeyman, a little bit of supervision and stewards on jobs and an officer of the local and president of the local. These things were all fundamental in my whole lifetime, and it was a great help to me. And it's the old saying is, you help the IBEW and it'll help you.
I owe every damn bit of success I had to the IBEW. Without it, I wouldn't have been anything. I've been picking beets or some damn thing.
Onward and upward. I have no doubt that, you know, we have old retired members, 60, 70-year members. When I come along, I was probably classified as some young upstart. And the same thing will happen when I leave. Some young man will step up, take the reins, and run this thing. And that's been a blessing of the IBEW. For some reason, somebody always steps up and takes the reins, no matter what the situation is. So I look for good things, and I look for them to have a 200th anniversary. I don't think I'll be there.